Ladies and gentlemen, the intercom crackled, the captain's voice unusually tight. If there are any passengers aboard with advanced aviation or military flight experience, please make yourself known. The cabin stirred with confusion. Some passengers looked around nervously, others muttered half-jokes about bad turbulence or pilots falling asleep. Jessica barely opened an eye, brushing it off. Civilian flights often made odd calls. Medical emergencies, turbulence warnings, the occasional diversion. Nothing she hadn't heard before. But then a figure appeared in the aisle, a tall man with broad shoulders, his uniform jacket crisp despite the long flight. His silver hair and steady eyes carried an air of command that was impossible to miss. Passengers shifted out of his way instinctively. An admiral, and not just any admiral. Jessica blinked. She knew that face. Admiral Jonathan Reeves. Decorated veteran, former carrier strike group commander, the kind of man whose name showed up in briefing rooms and military history lectures. What was he doing here, on this flight, walking with urgency and authority straight toward the flight deck? When he reached row 7, he turned and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Is there a Top Gun pilot on board?" The cabin went utterly silent. Jessica's eyes snapped open fully now. Her pulse quickened. She sank lower into her seat, hoping invisibility would cloak her. The admiral's eyes swept the rows, calm but searching, like a man accustomed to scanning radar for threats. Passengers exchanged bewildered glances. A young man in row 8 half raised a hand, muttering something about flying Cessnas, but the admiral shook his head, dismissing it. Jessica tried to steady her breath. She could keep quiet. She should keep quiet. Whatever was happening up front, surely the professional crew could handle it. This was a commercial jet, not a dogfight over the Pacific. Her leave was supposed to be about rest, anonymity, letting the world spin without her for once. But then came the second announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice was thinner this time, strained, "we've encountered a situation. Our first officer has collapsed, and we are diverting. I need immediate assistance." A ripple of panic coursed through the cabin. Gasps, prayers, whispered questions. Jessica's hands curled into fists on her lap. She couldn't hide anymore. Row 10 stood. The admiral's eyes locked onto her instantly, recognition flashing in his sharp gaze. His voice softened. Not a command now, but something close to relief. "Lieutenant Commander Hale." Half the cabin turned in surprise. Whispers spread like wildfire. "She's military. She's a pilot." Jessica adjusted her cap and gave a small nod. Her voice was low, steady, but carried. "Yes, sir." Havoc reporting. The admiral stepped aside, motioning toward the cockpit. "Then let's save this flight." The cockpit smelled faintly of burned electronics and stress. The captain, a middle-aged man with sweat beading at his temples, looked up as Jessica entered, his eyes filled with both hope and fear. The first officer was slumped in his chair, oxygen mask pressed against his face, a flight attendant kneeling beside him. "God, thank you," the captain exhaled. "You're trained." Jessica slid into the co-pilot's seat, her fingers moving instinctively over controls she hadn't touched outside a simulator in months. Different aircraft, different systems, but flying was flying. Muscle memory took over. "Top Gun graduate," she said calmly. "What's the situation?" The captain briefed her quickly. Instrument malfunctions, worsening weather ahead, and now a single pilot left to handle everything on a transatlantic red-eye. It was too much for one man alone. Jessica's jaw set. "We'll do it together." Back in the cabin, passengers whispered in awe. The young man from row 8 leaned over to an older woman. "Did you hear? She's Top Gun. Like, the real Top Gun." The admiral, standing watch near the cockpit door, allowed himself the faintest smile. He had known Jessica Hale's reputation, heard stories of her daring maneuvers in training, her calm under fire during deployments. But seeing her now, stepping into chaos without hesitation, reminded him why the Navy trusted her. And why kindness sometimes carried the weight of steel. For the next hour, the storm outside battered the plane like a living thing. Lightning flashed across the windows, turbulence rattled the cabin, and every jolt sent prayers into the air. But inside the cockpit, Jessica was steady as stone. Her voice never wavered as she called out headings, adjusted controls, reassured the captain. "You've got this," she told him more than once, her tone equal parts command and comfort. You're not alone. The Admiral peeked in occasionally, watching as the young woman in row 10 transformed into the warrior he'd always heard about. Passengers too began to sense it, the calm that seemed to radiate forward, through every word she spoke, every adjustment she made. The fear began to ease. People breathed again. But then, another twist. The storm intensified, worse than the forecasts. The diversion airport announced its runways were temporarily closed due to crosswinds. Fuel levels were dropping faster than anticipated. Options narrowed. Jessica scanned the maps, calculating, running scenarios in her head. Her mind raced back to her Top Gun training, the countless hours in the desert, instructors barking about decision-making under fire. The lesson drilled into her deepest. When in doubt, trust your team. Trust humanity. She looked at the captain. We can't make it to Lisbon. Nearest alternate. Nav chart shows a military strip. RAF base, Cornwall coast. The Admiral stepped in, his presence commanding but steady. I'll get on the comms. They'll clear you. Consider it done. And just like that, the impossible became possible. The final descent was the kind of landing aviators have nightmares about. Crosswinds slamming the fuselage, rain blinding the windshield, alarms blaring warnings of every kind. The passengers clutched hands, silent tears slipping down cheeks. Jessica's hand closed over the captain's trembling one on the throttle. Her voice was firm. On my mark. We ride this together. 3, 2, 1. The wheels hit tarmac with a bone-shaking screech. The plane skidded, fishtail-ed, then steadied. Gasps broke into cries of relief, applause bursting like thunder through the cabin. They were down. Safe. The captain slumped back in his seat, exhausted but alive. He turned to Jessica, voice hoarse. I couldn't have done that without you. Jessica only shook her head gently. You did it. I just reminded you how. When the cabin doors opened at last, emergency crews rushing in, the passengers filed out into the damp night. Each one glanced toward row 10, now forever etched in memory. Some whispered thanks, others touched her arm briefly in passing, as though hoping a fragment of her courage might cling to them. And then came the Admiral. He stood at the base of the stairs, rain slicking his shoulders, his posture as straight as ever. When Jessica stepped onto the tarmac, he snapped a salute, sharp, deliberate, and filled with unspoken respect. For a moment, Jessica hesitated, then returned it with quiet dignity. The Admiral's voice was low, just for her. You didn't just fly tonight. You reminded them what it means when one person chooses to stand up. Even when they'd rather stay seated. Jessica looked back at the plane, lights glowing against the storm. Her heart was heavy and light all at once. She had only wanted rest. Instead, she had been reminded of something greater, how humanity leaned on each other in fragile moments, and how compassion could be as steadying as steel wings. Row 10 was quiet again. But the world was forever changed.